Summary of Justice Judge's reasoning and analysis in Ousainou and Ami Bojan's acquittal by Kex News. The count-by-count breakdown of judicial reasoning for the acquittal of Ousainou Bojan, first accused, and Ami Bojan, second accused, in the judgment delivered on March 30th, 2026 by Justice Jaiti. Count 1 and Count 2, murder, Police Constable Sanjay Gomez and Pate Jallo. Justice Jede found that the prosecution failed to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that Ousainou Bojang was the person who shot the officers. Justice Jede identified numerous contradictions, inconsistencies, and evidential gaps in the prosecution cases regarding the identification of the shooter. He established that the evidence on the crucial issue was fraught with serious doubt, which must legally be resolved in favor of the accused. Justice Jede also highlighted that Ousainou Bojang, WD1, testified at the time of the shooting, approx 9 p.m. on September 12, 2023, he was at his workplace, Smiling Coast residence in Brookwood, performing his night shift as a security guard. He maintained that he was at his post from 7 p.m. until 7 a.m. the following morning, except for a brief trip to a nearby shop at 11 p.m. Failure to investigate an alibi. Justice Jede emphasized that when an alibi is raised with sufficient particulars, the prosecution has a legal duty to investigate and disprove this. Justice Jede found that the state's investigation was selective, coercive, and ultimately indifferent to the truth. Justice Jede stated that investigators failed to verify the alibi through objective means such as a duty roster or neutral worker interviews, instead using pressure, intimidation, and detention against witnesses who supported it. This failure deemed fatal to the prosecution cases. Inadmissibility of extrajudicial statements while the prosecutions rely out of court statement, Justice Jede ruled their probative weight was substantially diminished because they contradicted oral testimony and lacked independent corroboration. Justice Jede concluded they could not form the sole basis for a finding of guilt. Count 3, acts of terrorism. The charge alleged that the attacker attacked the officer with a firearm, resulting in their death. Justice Jede found that because the prosecution failed to prove that Ousainou Bojang was the shooter in the murder counts, this charge necessarily fails. No credible evidence was produced to identify him as the perpetrator of the alleged terrorist act. Count 4, attempt to commit murder, Constable Anti-Jao. Justice Jede stated that the prosecution had to prove Ousainou Bojang had a direct intention to kill and perform an overt act toward the goal. Justice Jede highlighted that the alleged victim, Police Constable Anti-Jao, admitted under cross-examination that she could not identify Ousainou and had only seen images of Ousainou Bojang on social media, and without identification from the victim, Justice Jede found the evidence insufficient. Count 5, grievous bodily harm, Constable Anti-Jao. Justice Jede states that the count require proof that the first accused unlawfully caused grievous harm to the victim. Justice Jede cited the same evidential deficiency as in Count 4. He noted there was simply no credible evidence identifying Ousainou Bojang as the person who caused the injuries to Constable Jao. Justice Jede applied the fundamental principle that any reasonable doubt must be resolved in the favor of the accused. Count 6, accessories after the fact to murder Ami Bojang. The acquittal of Ami Bojang was based on both legal principles and the court's assessment of her testimony. Justice Jede highlighted that the liability of an accessory in a fundamentally dependent on the coexistence of a proven principles offense. Since the court has already acquitted Ousainou Bojang of murder, the foundational element for the charge that a murder had in fact have been committed could not be established. Justice Jede applied the legal maxim that there were the principal offense, the collapse for one, the proof, the superstructure of accessory liability built upon it must necessarily fail. Justice Jede found Ami Bojan's evidence to be consistent, credible, and corroborated by independent witnesses regarding her movement, and she did not know any criminal activity of her brother. Verdict: Ousainou Bojang and Ami Bojang were acquitted and discharged on all counts.